I felt completely untethered because losing my biggest champion, my biggest fan, my best friend was unconscionable. It was unimaginable. It was shocking. It was traumatic. It took the wind out of me like somebody punched me in the chest. My mom had been my hero all of my life.
Welcome to the GenX Shift podcast, a show for Gen Xers who are navigating some pretty tough transitions and aren't sure how to move forward. I'm your host, Michele Walter, proud Gen Xer, former lawyer turned entrepreneur, huge Jason Momoa fan, and margarita snob. And I've navigated a lot of transitions in my life, from losing my mom suddenly to a heart attack to starting my own business. But I often did it all on my own because I was too stubborn to ask for help. Now I'm on a mission to give actionable strategies to other Gen Xers so that they can find the confidence, courage, and clarity they need to make a shift. So let's rock and roll.
Hey, Gen Xers, welcome back to the podcast. Today is a solo episode with just me. I wanted to do something a little special for the month of May because for me, May is a pretty significant month. On May 25th, 2012, my mom, Patty Gibbs Walter, passed away at the young age of 58 from a heart attack. And so May for me is always marked by remembering that and by finding ways that I can still continue to celebrate my mom, her legacy, and her life, and the impact that she had on everyone and those around her. So because I know that a lot of Gen Xers either have lost parents when they were very young or are navigating the more recent loss of their parents, this is a topic that I feel is going to be near and dear to a lot of people's hearts. So I'm starting this month with the solo episode to talk a little bit more about my mom, the loss of her, how I navigated that. And I also want to share with you today 10 tips that I promise won't take all that long for how I eventually learned to navigate the grief and healing of my mom's death with a little bit more grace and ease for myself, and how I'm still learning to navigate that grief journey. And then later in this month, I'm going to release 2 episodes, a 2-parter, with an interview with my friend, fellow coach, and amazing Gen Xer, Christina Lord. And Christina is going to share about the loss of both of her parents and practices that she's found helpful in supporting her in her grief journey. So my hope for the podcast this month is that it offers a little bit of nourishment for you wherever you are in your journey of losing your parent or parents, and that we can start to normalize the grief that we are all continuing to experience because, here's the kicker. There isn't necessarily an endpoint to grief. What I have learned in not just losing my mom, but losing grandparents who I was particularly close to, losing my dogs, is that grief can show up in a variety of ways later down the road. And so I really want to plant the seed for us tough, pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. Let's just move on past the grief Gen Xers to know that grief is a healing journey and that we don't want to put any parameters or endpoints around it. So I actually have notes for today because I know that I tend to get a little, I just go with the flow. So I can get a little long form. And so I wanted to rein it in a little bit here today. And for those of you watching on video, I'm in a different environment today. I'm actually back in Nebraska at my dad's house in the basement, in the bedroom. And I have a makeshift podcast studio with a couple of TV trays, lawn chair that I'm sitting in with a pillow behind me, and we're making the most of it. We just do this wherever we can do it. So thanks for joining me in my Nebraska podcast studio. All right, so what I want to do with today's episode is tell you a little bit about my mom tell you what my relationship was like with my mom, and recognize that everybody has a different relationship with their parents. Some of us had great relationships. Maybe we had a great relationship with one parent and not the other. Some of us are adopted, and so we have different kinds of relationships with our adoptive parents. Maybe we know or don't know our biological parents. Parent-child relationships are so complex, right? And so I recognize that my experience may not be your experience. And as always, with the stories that we tell, my hope is that maybe you can see a little bit of yourself or a little bit of your journey in some of my story. And if not, that's okay. I want to respect and honor where you are in your story and your journey. Okay. So, as always, feel free to reach out to me if you have any reflections or questions or things that you want to share, especially when it comes to this grief process around losing our parents. So, let me start with giving you a sense of why I felt it was important to do this series on loss for the month of May. One of the things that I have learned about grieving the loss of a parent is that there is such an identity shift that comes along with that oftentimes. A lot of different kinds of identities. There's the identity that we have as the child and navigating what that means when our parent is gone. There's the identity that could come with being a caregiver for your parent. And so when the parent is gone and that caregiving identity is gone, what does that mean for who we are? And the other reason I thought it was important is that we're not taught how to grieve in this country. All right. Like, let's just get real with the fact that grief isn't something that especially Gen Xers were raised to understand and appreciate the realness of it and how to navigate it. If anything, we were taught to ignore it, go around it, push past it, resist it, forget about it. And my invitation here today is for you to get more curious about it in a way that isn't overwhelming. Because one thing I want to make sure is crystal clear is that when we experience the loss of a parent, oftentimes that is a traumatic event. And we haven't been encouraged or learned how to metabolize the impact of that event. And so understanding how to properly grieve and move through that can feel very foreign to us and to our nervous systems. And if that's the case for you, please know that that's okay. It's normal. Reach out to me or reach out to someone for support, because the last thing I want to do is to have you walk away from this podcast thinking, well, I got to deal with my grief. Let's appreciate where you are and that it may require very small, digestible steps to be able to learn how to navigate that grief. I believe that we are never old enough to lose our parents. For me, I find it triggering when somebody says, oh, well, your parent was, 70 or 80. They lived a good life. It was their time. That's not comforting for me, at least. Maybe that's comforting for other people. I don't believe that we are ever fully equipped to understand how to live our life without our parents, at least for me. I also want to recognize that there are different ways that the impact of losing our parents affects us depending on when we lost our parent. So for folks who lose their parent at a very young age, that has a different impact than someone who loses a parent at an older age. Someone who loses a parent at a younger age then has the whole rest of their life to face navigating the big milestones in life. Graduations, going to college, getting a job, getting married, having kids, not having kids, like all of these milestones that because you lost your parent at a young age, you now don't have your parent there to celebrate and go through those milestones with you. And then for somebody who's lost their parent at a later stage in life, it's different because at least for me, I spent 40 years of my life with my mom. So I have all of these memories, all of these milestones and celebrations that I celebrated with her that are wonderful to have. And they create kind of a bittersweetness because now I know I have that frame of reference for what it was like to have my mom for so long. And now I know that for the rest of my life, I'm learning how to navigate those celebrations and those milestones without her. So just appreciating that it's different for everybody, especially when we're talking about losing our parents at different ages. Either way, regardless of when we lose our parent, it's going to require us to make a shift in our lives, to learn how we navigate our life now without our parent, regardless of what that relationship was like. Because for some people who maybe didn't have a close relationship with their parent, that might look like navigating life, never having any closure or resolution or the kind of relationship that you wanted to have. For folks who had a great relationship with their parent, it means learning how to make the shift into living a life without your close confidant, your biggest champion or cheerleader, without that close-knit relationship of your parent. So that's what I want to talk about a little bit today. And you hear actual pages, like I've handwritten notes. So you hear the pages. I'm serious about this stuff today. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my mom and her and my life with her, including what it was like losing her, how I dealt with it at the time, how I continue to deal with it, and what I've now learned and kind of wish I knew at that time. And as I said, then I want to share 10 tips that maybe you can find some solace in those for your healing journey. So let me start with Patty's story. My mom had me when she was 18 years old. And I remember when I was very young that I did the math on when my parents got married and my mom actually had me, which was not 9 months in between. So my parents got married in November of 71. My mom had me in February of 72. And I remember how horrified my grandmother was when she realized that I had done the math and knew that my mom was pregnant with me when my parents got married. So this was back in 1971. And at that time, that was shocking for my grandparents, to say the least. But from the minute I was born, of course, I don't have a recollection of this, but I have enough pictures and stories from my mom and just sense of my mom to know that from the minute I was born, probably from the minute she conceived me, that my mom and I were cut from the same cloth. People always said how much alike we were. And I have baby pictures that I'm going to put up here in the video that show my mom at, I think, about 3 or 6 months, I can't remember, and show me at the same age. And other than the fact that her photo is black and white and mine is in color, you wouldn't be able to tell us apart. We look like the same baby. So we very much looked alike. We sounded alike. We acted alike. Like we were just two peas in a pod. I was always, from as far back as I can remember, and even from looking at my baby books that my mom was writing in, I was always her baby girl. Still am her baby girl. Didn't matter how old I was. I was always my mom's baby girl. She wholeheartedly embraced being a mom. I don't know what it was like for her to find out at the young age of 18, actually 17. She would have found out that she was pregnant when she was 17, and then she was 18 when she had me. I don't know what that was like for her back then. I don't know if she had doubts about having me. I have no idea. We never had that conversation. All I know is that when it came to bringing me into the world and raising me, she wholeheartedly embraced being my mom. She was home with me all throughout my early elementary years. She finally went back to work at some point when I was in elementary school. She was there for me every single day. I mean, we were best buds. She played with me. She played Barbies, strawberry shortcake, played games. She taught me how to bake and cook, or I guess she brought me into the kitchen. I still don't really know how to bake and cook. She tried. You know, we did everything together. We were an inseparable mother-daughter duo. And she taught me really how to stand up for myself from a very, very young age. I remember a couple of things in elementary school. The first one is that at that time period, boys and girls at my elementary school could not play together at recess. Stupid rule. The teachers thought it would be bad for the boys and girls to play games together at recess. But a couple of my girlfriends and I wanted to be able to go play touch football with the boys at recess and the teacher and principal wouldn't let us. So my mom actually wrote a note to the school saying that my daughter Michele has my full permission to play football with the boys at recess. They still didn't let me. So one day my girlfriends and I, we throw on a couple of the boys' hooded sweatshirts and we disguise ourselves and we sneak over and start playing football with the boys. And somebody tattled on us. We got in trouble. We got dragged into the principal's office. Our parents got called. My mom came in pissed, didn't understand why the girls and boys couldn't play together. And she ended up sitting with me in detention because she said, I'm not going to let my daughter do this alone. I fully support her and her right to be able to do this, so I'm going to sit with her in detention. That's the kind of mom she was. The other kind of mom she was is that she told me not to take crap from anybody. So I remember also in elementary school when some of the girls started wearing bras and developing breasts, that some of the boys, one in particular, thought it would be fun to run around on the playground and snap the girls' bra straps. So I came home one day and told my mom that this one little boy in particular had been doing that, and she was pissed. And she told me, if he does that to you, you warn him once. If he does it again, you knock him on his ass. Now, setting aside whether that is advisable conflict resolution in today's world, this is how we rolled back in the 70s. So the next day I went to school. The little boy came up and tried to snap my bra strap. I kindly told him not to do that. He laughed, did it again, and knocked him on his ass. I got called into the principal's office. My mom got called again. My mom came in and ripped the principal and the teacher a new one for letting the little boy run around on the playground and behave like that. And she stood up for me, and she taught me to stand up for myself. So she was always my biggest champion. She was the loudest mom at all of my sporting events. She was our softball coach. She was very vocal in standing up not only for me, but teaching me how to stand up for those who are less fortunate. And she stood up for those who are less fortunate. I remember at the time that we had a gal on our team, on our softball team, who had Down syndrome, that my mom wanted to play. She specifically allowed this girl to play, and she caught so much shit from the other parents for letting this girl with Down syndrome play because it was screwing up our chances of winning. But my mom wasn't having any of that. She was like, she has just as much right to play as everybody else, and she's playing. So that's the kind of mom that she was. She was a champion not only of me, but for other people who maybe couldn't stand up for or champion themselves. So she always taught me too that I could do anything. And I don't necessarily remember her being all rah-rah about it and saying, you can do whatever you want. It was just the confidence that she had in me, that she never doubted me and my abilities, just seeped into me. And always felt like I could kind of ride the wave of her confidence in me, which is something I'll come back to. As I got older, and of course went off to college in Omaha, Nebraska, which was 3 hours away from where we grew up in Lexington. And then when she had moved to Kearney, actually was after my parents divorced. When I was a senior in high school, my mom moved to Kearney. My dad moved to Grand Island, different places. So I went to Omaha, which was about, I guess, 2.5 or 3 hours from Kearney. And that was, of course, a huge transition for my mom because we'd had such a close relationship for me growing up that me now not being in the house with her every day was a big adjustment for her. And then especially when I moved to DC after law school, that was a huge adjustment for her baby girl to be half a continent away. And so she and my brother and I packed up my little hatchback car with a bunch of plants, drove to DC. Back in the day before we had Google Maps, we had hard copy AAA maps that we had to order in the mail so that we could figure out the route to DC. And I remember at that time, I think we had an iPod that the song Bop by Hanson was really popular, and my mom loved it. My brother and I loved it, and we played that song nonstop on the way out to DC. And so to this day, Bop is the ringtone I have for my brother when he calls. And that song has a lot of special memories for me. Every version that Hanson makes of that song, I absolutely love. So my mom really had to learn how to live her life without her baby girl right there next to her every single day. And I know that that was an adjustment for her. And we had some arguments over it. And now in hindsight, I have much more compassion for her as a woman, as a mom. At the time, of course, I just felt like, the daughter who was getting, having her mom be angry at her for moving away. But I have more compassion for her now and what she was going through and how hard of an adjustment that was for her. She never liked any of my boyfriends. And I hate to admit it, but she was right about every single one of them. None of them was ever good enough for her baby girl. And she had no problem telling me that. And still, she tried the best she could to be civil and nice to them, and also let them know that she wasn't going to tolerate anybody treating her baby girl like crap. So even after I moved to DC, my mom continued to be my biggest fan, my biggest supporter. She was so excited. She and my grandpa, her dad, both, when I got the job at the Department of Justice, they were just so proud of me. And she, from halfway across the country, developed close relationships with my friends and the people that I work with at the Department of Justice. My mom was emailing my friends at DOJ almost as much as she was emailing me, and she talked to them on a regular basis. She even, my dear friend who's one of the security guards still at DOJ, she developed a close relationship with him. I mean, she was still their mom from half a country away. And so for my 30th birthday, when I was working at DOJ, my mom was always a big fan of 30th birthdays. So let me back that truck up a little bit, or of just birthdays in general, not just 30th birthdays. She raised me with this reverence for birthdays because she felt like you should be treated as the queen, king, the sovereign that you are for the day on your birthday. So we always had big birthday parties. We always invited everybody to the birthday party. We didn't discriminate or exclude anyone. And so because of her, I have a real love for birthdays, and I love to celebrate the crap out of my birthday and everybody else's birthday. So for my 30th birthday, when I was in DC, unbeknownst to me, a couple of my dear friends there at DOJ, Dan, and another one, Seth, and there might have been some other folks involved, they actually were coordinating with my mom to come surprise me for my 30th birthday. So my mom, once I moved away from the house, she always called me really early in the morning on my birthday. So that morning of my 30th birthday, she hadn't called me yet, which I thought was kind of weird. I get to work and it's about 9 or 9:30 in the morning, and she finally calls me. And I could tell she wasn't in the office or at home because there was a lot of background noise. And she just said, "Oh, I've just been busy. I'm at work trying to get some stuff done." And then I hear flight announcements going off. And I think, she's at the airport. She's flying to DC to come surprise me for my 30th birthday. So I didn't say anything. I just let her pretend like I didn't know. And so we get off the phone. And so all day I'm waiting, wondering when my mom's going to get there. And later that day, we have a 30th birthday celebration in the conference room, which we always celebrated people's birthdays at DOJ, which I thought was amazing. And so we're having cake and food and all these things. And the whole time I'm waiting, like, where's my mom? She should be here by now. And finally, as I'm cutting the cake, a little annoyed that she's not there yet, I hear somebody say my name, and I turn and I look, and it's my mom, my grandpa, my Papa Norman, and my brother Ryan, all standing there. And I remember thinking, well, it's about time. And then half a second later, I was like, oh, I'm supposed to be surprised. So I had to act surprised. So my friend Dan had driven to the airport in Baltimore to go pick them up and bring them, all to surprise me for my 30th birthday. I mean, that's the kind of mom she was. Those are the kind of friends that I have, by the way, that would coordinate with that with my mom. So I remember so much how birthdays were so meaningful to my mom. And that's something that I try to carry on still today. I always kind of, I don't want to say regretted. There was a little part of me that always has a little twinge of guilt, I will admit, to not having kids, to not giving my mom grandkids. I'm single to this day, and I don't have and will never have kids. My dogs have been my kids. And so for my mom, my dog Bailey at the time, who I had for 14 years, he was a Lhasa Apso, he was her grandson. So when I used to fly back from DC to Nebraska for Christmas, my mom would joke with people about how her daughter and grandson were flying home and how her grandson had to ride in cargo. And people didn't know what she was talking about. So my mom was very close with Bailey, and I would fly him back to Nebraska for her to watch if I went like out of the country on travel or something. And so in May of 2012, by that point, my dog Bailey had gotten to be about 14 and he was really slowing down. He wasn't having a good quality of life. So I made the difficult decision that I was going to have to say goodbye to him. And I was going to have a vet come to the house to perform the procedure. And so the night before, I actually got Bailey on a Skype call with mom. We didn't have Zoom or FaceTime back then, so it was Skype, so that she could see him and say goodbye to him. And I have this awesome picture, which I'll throw up in the video too, of Bailey kind of laying with his feet up on my laptop and my mom looking at him. And that would turn out to be a really kind of forecasting, or I don't know, there's something about that photo, and I think you'll see it. You'll know it when you see it. That photo of my mom that just turned out to be kind of eerie forecasting, foreshadowing. So on May 5th, I said goodbye to Bailey, and my mom was really supportive in helping me around that grief. And less than 3 weeks later, my mom died. So on May 25th, 2012, I was working at DOJ and I went out that morning to go get coffee. And our office at the time was on 6th and D Street in Northwest Washington, D.C. And I was on the corner talking to a friend of mine, and my phone kept ringing and ringing and ringing, and I just was ignoring it. And so I left talking to my friend and went across the street, and my brother called, and it was him who'd been trying to call. And I finally answered the phone, and all he could say was, "Mom's dead. Mom's dead." And it just didn't register. I just didn't believe it. I couldn't process what he was saying. And I crossed the street, went into a museum that was there on the corner, sat down on the bench. And it's kind of a blur, but I remember talking to my brother, and some cops had come to his apartment in Lincoln to give him the notification, because what had happened is my mom had been at work just past midnight. She worked 3 jobs. Most of her life, she worked 2 or 3 jobs. As soon as she had gone back to work when I was in elementary school, from that point on, she worked at least 2 jobs. So she was working 3 jobs at the time. Her primary job was at a crop production place in Kearney, Nebraska. And so the summertime was really busy for them. And she considered herself to be the office mommy. She took care of all of her guys, as she called them. And she typically worked insane hours during that period of time. She'd gotten to the point where she never really took great care of herself. And I think that got backburnered even more after my Papa Norman, her dad, passed away. And my speculation, again, we didn't talk a lot about it, is that she had a lot of guilt around that, because I think she thought she should have been able to do something to keep my grandpa from falling down and hurting his hip and eventually dying at the age of 80. And I think she experienced a real significant loss of identity because she was no longer his caregiver. So I think she experienced a lot of depression that she never got help for, never talked about. And it just manifested in her not taking care of herself, not sleeping well, gaining weight, not eating well. And that all eventually caught up with her. She was smoking, unbeknownst to me. And so working late in her office, just past midnight, she had a massive heart attack and died alone in her office on May 25th in the wee hours of the night. And one of the guys that she worked with came in the next morning and found her. And so then the paramedics, the police contacted my brother, her fiance, Kurt, and then my brother eventually contacted me out in DC. And so I remember going back up to the office, into my friend Dan's office, and I remember bits and pieces, but basically Dan then reached out to our friend Sherry, and the two of them mobilized other people in the office. They mobilized to drive me back to my house in Arlington, to arrange a flight home for me, help me pack, get me to the airport, and I flew back home. And I was back home in Nebraska for about 6 weeks, dealing with the aftermath of that, all of the arrangements, just the logistics of death that nobody ever prepares you for, that you're never prepared for, that I never had to do with my brother and with Kurt. And thank God the three of us were very close because we never had any arguments. Everything was very easeful for us. We just fully supported each other. And so thank God for that, because I know that families where there are some more challenging dynamics, that whole aftermath can be even more traumatic. So at the time, I was, just past 40. I was 40 when my mom died. And at that time, I didn't really have any tools or practices or strategies or anything like that to support me in my grief. I had just been working as a lawyer. I was doing triathlons. I was just doing a lot of things, but I wasn't doing a lot of self-reflection and inner work. And so at the time, how I quote coped was I got pretty depressed. I was not one of those people who found comfort in going back to work. The last thing I wanted to do was go back to work. And my office was very gracious at giving me time off. That 6 weeks was amazing to be able to do that. And I couldn't have asked for a better place to go back to. I just didn't want to go back to work at all because I was depressed. I felt completely untethered because losing my biggest champion, my biggest fan, my best friend was unconscionable. It was unimaginable. It was shocking. It was traumatic. It took the wind out of me like somebody punched me in the chest. My mom had been my hero all of my life. I am wearing right now, I'm going to pan the camera down a little bit for those watching the video, a Kenny Rogers concert t-shirt, which is one of two Kenny Rogers concert t-shirts that I have that were my mom's from back in the 80s, because she was a big Kenny Rogers fan and so was I. And in elementary school, when we had to give a speech, I picked to do my speech on my mom, my hero. And so I wore this Kenny Rogers t-shirt in elementary school that was my mom's, and I gave a speech about how my mom was my hero. Nobody prepares you for how to navigate your life when you don't have your hero there, when you don't have your biggest champion, that unconditional love. Because even when my mom and I had disagreements and we didn't agree, and believe me, we had political and philosophical differences for sure, I never, ever questioned her love for me. I took for granted that she and that support and that love would always be there. And so that was a real bitch slap when it was gone. So I didn't know how to deal with that. I didn't even know that I didn't know how to deal with it. I just was depressed. I didn't feel like doing much. And I didn't know how to navigate it. And I remember shortly after I got back from being gone for 6 weeks that somebody wanted me to go do something, or I don't know what, they asked me something, and I said, I don't feel like going. I'm feeling pretty shitty today. And they said, well, why? And I'm like, well, because I'm sad about my mom. And they said, well, that's been 6 weeks ago. I thought you would have been over that by now. Yeah. Those kinds of comments are not appreciated when you're in grief. Grief, again, has no time frame. So I don't want to say I didn't navigate it well. I navigated the best I could with the resources that I had at the time, with how I knew how to do things at the time. And that looked like just either being really, really lost in depression or really, really distracted in other things. There was no kind of in between. There was no giving space for the grief. There was no compassion to myself. There was no real healing. So, what happened, kind of either synchronistically or consequently, or maybe both, is that I started to become really burnt out at work because even though my mom loved her work and she loved what she did, one of the things I did not idolize about her was how much she worked. It was a lot for me to talk her into taking a quote vacation. And a vacation for her looked like coming out to Arlington to help me paint the first townhouse that I bought, my first home. Like that was a vacation for her. She came out to help me paint and move. I had to talk her into coming out to watch me do Ironman Arizona in November of 2011, so less than a year before she passed away, because that was during a time when she would have been volunteering and helping the local community center get ready for the Thanksgiving dinner that they prepared for less fortunate people in Kearney. And so she was always really busy with that during November. And it took a lot for me to talk her into, it's okay, they can function without you. They will survive. It will be there when you get back. So you can come to Arizona to cheer me on at my first Ironman. And she did it. And she cheered, of course, louder than anybody, right? So one of the things that I took from her death is that I don't want to be working in my office on a brief and have a heart attack after midnight. That's not the life that I want to have. So her death really caused me to start to question my life purpose, what I was doing, even though purpose wasn't something that she ever talked about. I feel like she thought her purpose was to serve, like so many women, especially of that generation and my generation. And she served from an empty cup constantly because she never did anything to fill her own cup or take care of herself. I didn't want to be like that. I knew that I wanted to serve, and I wanted to do so in a way that felt purposeful and energizing. Like I wanted more from my life, not in comparison to hers. I wanted more for me. I knew that being an attorney wasn't how I wanted to live my life anymore. I just didn't know how to get out of it. And so it's really started this big spiral of burnout and anxiety and depression because I wanted to find purpose. I wanted to find a way to live my life that honored the legacy of my mom. I wanted to find a way to make her proud, even though I knew she was proud of me as an attorney. But I had all these things going on in my head that just sort of compounded on top of my unhealed, unprocessed grief that sent me on this decade-long journey of trying to find my way. On top of that, I also had a lot of anger for a while, not so much now. Sometimes it does come up, but I had a lot of anger at my mom. Like, it's okay to be angry at our parents when they die and after they die. It's okay to be angry with them while they're alive too. And my anger was rooted in the fact that my mom spent so much time taking care of everybody else at the expense of her own health and well-being, that in the end, ironically, it actually ended up preventing her from being around to take care of other people. 58 is way, way too young to die. And so because she didn't prioritize herself while she was alive, it ended up robbing her of what she wanted to do, which is to be around to help take care of everybody. And so for a while, I was angry at her for not taking better care of herself. And I know now, in hindsight, why that was. I can have compassion for that and understanding for that. And then I was also angry at myself because I thought, well, I shouldn't have moved so far away. I should have stayed closer to Nebraska and like kept an eye on her. Maybe if I'd stayed closer to Nebraska, she wouldn't have been smoking. She wouldn't have been so depressed. I could have helped her navigate her depression better. Like, I blamed myself. So there was a lot of anger, blame, and shame, both at her and at me, that took its toll on me. And I eventually started working my way through that. And I started getting to the point where I had compassion for my mom as the woman, the person that she was, not just as my mom. I think it's normal as we get older and sort of become adults ourselves, we start looking at our parents through a different lens because we start struggling with some of the same things they struggled with that we didn't understand when we were kids. And so I could see my mom for the woman that she was, for the burdens that she carried, for her own lack of self-worth that kept her in that place of feeling like she had to serve because she had to prove herself and prove her worth and prove her existence to other people. Those are things I just started appreciating that I didn't appreciate while she was alive. So that's kind of my journey with my mom through her death. And now what I want to focus on are some of the things that I've learned over the last now 12 years of living my life without my mom, and some of the things that I have done to help me continue to heal through that grief. So the first thing is learning and practicing mindfulness meditation. I was not practicing mindfulness meditation. As I said, I wasn't doing much self-reflective stuff when she died. And so shortly after she died, for some reason, I don't even remember, I started doing yoga. I think probably thinking that I needed to be more flexible as a triathlete. And so let me try yoga. I have a different appreciation for yoga now. And yoga eventually led me to meditation. And I went to a 3-day meditation retreat at a place called Yogaville outside Charlottesville, Virginia, which is fabulous. Highly recommend it. And that's really where I started learning more about yoga, more about mindfulness meditation. And I came back from that and started working on the habit of developing a meditation practice. And then over the years, I learned more about mindfulness. When I moved to Colorado, I ended up meeting some folks who were practicing and were teachers of mindfulness meditation. And eventually, through some synchronistic meetings, I learned of the mindfulness meditation teacher certification program through Sounds True with Tara Brach and Jack Kornfield, and decided, yeah, I'm going to enroll in this. I'm going to explore mindfulness meditation a little bit more, not knowing that that was going to be the path that would contribute in part to me wanting to quit my job and start my own business. And now, as I have learned to live a more mindful way of life in true mindfulness meditation practice, which is looking at life through the lens of present moment awareness and non-judgment and compassion, I look back at the immediate time after my mom's death and those years after that, and I have so much compassion for who I was at that time. I have so much compassion for myself now as I continue to navigate that grief. And I can truly say that having a mindfulness meditation practice and learning more about the ancient mindfulness meditation teachings and principles has given me an anchor in more ways than one for changing the relationship to my grief and to my mom's death. Because one thing that I have learned is that it's very natural to resist our grief, to resist the death of our parents. And resistance can look like denying it, ignoring it, stuffing it down, swallowing it, moving around it, distracting ourselves from it. That's all resistance. And that resistance only compounds the suffering in the face of the pain. I can't change the painful fact that my mom isn't here. What I can change is my resistance to it, and therefore I can adjust my suffering to it. And so mindfulness meditation is the first tip. I even hate to call it a tip, but it's the first thing I would recommend to give you that anchor, to give you something to ground into in order to learn how to change your relationship with grief so that you can actually create space for it, compassion for it, for yourself, and learn how to move through instead of resisting your grief. The second thing that has helped me to continue to heal is that I talk about my mom. I have always talked about her from the moment that she passed. I think, we talked about it with family members. We shared stories and memories, And because so many of my friends knew my mom back in DC, it was very easy for me to go back to DC and still talk about my mom with my friends, talk about my mom with my friends from high school who felt like my mom was their mom too. And and clearly, I'm still talking about her. I talk about her all the time. And I think for some people, it can be hard to talk about the people that we've lost because we fear it's going to bring up memories, it's going to bring up the pain. And if that's the case, I invite you to go back to tip number 1, which is mindfulness and the practices that it has and the invitations it has, because it's in talking about the person that we've lost that we can actually heal. We can actually still be with them, still give them space and presence in our lives to recognize they may be physically gone and invite in the possibility that they're still here with us in other ways. And by talking about them, we can still honor them, give a life to them just in a different way. The third thing is that I have allowed myself the time and space to donate, regift my mom's things in my own time. When my mom died, she had a basement that was it was a big basement, and it was probably a quarter of the way full of not only her stuff, but my grandparents' stuff and my great-grandparents' stuff. She had like generations of stuff in her basement. Some of which, very little of which we kind of went through in the 6 weeks that I was back home. A lot of it got shipped back with me to Virginia and went up in my attic. And then some of it I filtered through when I moved to Colorado, but a lot of it still came with me then from Colorado and went into my basement. And it's only been in the last couple of years that I actually focused on clearing and decluttering some of that to create space, both physical space and emotional space, understanding that there's some of that stuff I want to keep because I'm kind of sentimental. And there's some of it that I don't want to keep just for myself to hang on to when there are other people that could be using it. And so because I've had time that's passed and I've been on my own healing journey, I've gotten to the point where I can let some of that stuff go. Don't feel like you have to force yourself to let stuff go. If you want to hang on to stuff for 10 years, it's okay. Like, don't let people try and tell you, you got to get rid of their clothes. You got to get rid of this. Like, get rid of it so you don't keep the reminders around. You do you. You do your grief process. Don't let anyone dictate your grief process to you. Now, we can start to get curious about when we move into unhealthy attachment to some of those things. But for now, I just want you to know, like, take your time in going through their things. Keep what you want to keep. My brother and I share custody of our mom's favorite teddy bear. We exchange it every Christmas, so it lives at one of our houses. I still have a sweater that my mom wore. I clearly still have t-shirts that she wore that I still wear, like knickknacks. Allow those physical things to be part of your healing journey and know that when it's time to release them, you'll release them. I said I talk about my mom. The fourth thing I want to mention is that I talk to my mom. And that's something I realized recently that I've been forgetting to do. And I want to get back to more of that. Because for me, again, I believe that although she's not physically here, her energy, her essence, her soul, her spirit are still here. And I'll talk about that in just a second. So I talk to her. I ask her to talk back to me. I think for me, recognizing that just because my mom died doesn't mean I can't talk to her. Like, that's an important piece of my healing, is to not feel like I am now cut off and separate from my mom, because I don't believe that's the case. There are some days when that feels more challenging to believe, for sure. And on those days, I invite in my mindfulness practice, my other spiritual practices, and I invite myself to, let's talk to her. Let's get out a picture of her and let's talk to her. Let's hold her teddy bear. Let's smell some of her perfume and talk to her. So I still talk to my mom, and I think that's been healing for me. The fifth thing is, as I mentioned already, is just acknowledging the grief and the trauma of it. Just naming it. It felt shitty. It felt unbearable. there aren't even words to really fully describe it. I talk about feeling untethered, like losing my biggest champion, my hero, like all of those things are just beyond words. So we want to acknowledge the depth of that pain. And I can imagine that some of you are saying, I don't want to acknowledge it. It's too scary. That's okay. This is why I'm going to come to another tip in a second. But I think the more we can turn to and acknowledge and name that grief, even 10, 12, 20, 30 years later, is so important. It's so important to name that we are continuing to grieve. And again, don't let anybody tell you that your grief should be over. To name and acknowledge that the impact of that event is traumatic. Where the trauma comes in is when we're not able to metabolize that impact. If we let it just get stuck, if we ignore it, press it down, think that we're just going to move through it or bulldoze through it or distract our way out of it, that's when the trauma lodges in our body. That's when our body starts to have signs of trauma. That's when we start not being able to sleep or eat or being more stressed or burnt out or anxious or depressed or all the things. Like, let's name it. Let's bring it into the light and learn how we metabolize that trauma, learn how we metabolize that grief so that it doesn't get stuck and lodged in us and then rear its ugly head in very surprising ways down the road, like sitting in your closet, crying, wishing you didn't wake up the next morning. That was my experience of not healing and metabolizing my grief and trauma. The sixth thing, which comes back to something I said earlier, is actually my coaching training, the principles that I learned in my coaching certification, which very much match up with a lot of the mindfulness principles that I was learning. That was, again, another synchronistic invitation for my healing journey, because I have learned through the power of finding my own insights and my own wisdom comes great healing. I think so often when we're grieving or we're in pain, we want to look to others for the answers. We want other people to be able to tell us, well, how do I fix this? How do I just not have to experience this shit? What coaching taught me is that when we learn to face, and mindfulness taught me this too, when we learn to face and integrate the challenging, difficult, dark, shitty feelings, we are actually able to go into a depth within us that holds such wisdom and insight that we never imagined was there, and that can serve as our greatest source of healing and wisdom and knowledge, and that we are ourselves our own answer, that we have within us the insight and wisdom that we're hoping somebody else gives us. Nobody else is there to give that to you. When you find that own source deep within yourself, that's how you create sustainable knowledge as a fuel to move you forward. If somebody else just tells you what to do or tells you how to do it, that can get you some short-term benefits. But until you learn to really tap into the insight within yourself, you will never find that sustainable fuel. That's why there's the saying, you can teach a person to fish or give them a fish. Somebody gives you a fish, that'll hold you over for a while, but you still haven't actually learned how to fish and do it for yourself. And coaching has taught me, I don't want to necessarily say do it for myself. Coaching has taught me how to find that wisdom in myself, and then don't always do it by yourself. Don't embrace rugged individualism. Also know where to seek support and help on your journey. So that actually brings me, I'm going to skip ahead to one of my tips. Did I even have this on here as a tip? I don't know. I guess I'm going to add this in here. Is that know that it's okay to get support, to seek therapy, to seek a coach, to rely on your friends, to seek a support group, that you don't have to do it alone. So while the insight and the wisdom is within you, that doesn't mean that you have to do everything, especially grieve, by yourself. It is so important to get support, to find a soft place to land, a supportive listener, supportive community to help you remember that you're not alone in your grief and on your healing journey. So I think we're up to number 7. The 7th thing that I've realized that's helped me heal is my dog Winnie. All of my dogs. So after Bailey passed right before my mom did, and then I adopted another dog when I got back after all of my mom's services and logistics and all of that. My second dog, Addie, who I had for a couple of years, and then she passed away from leukemia. And then I adopted Winnie right around the same time that I went to the meditation retreat at Yogaville. So it was January of 2015 that I adopted Winnie. And so I've had Winnie for 9 years. And my dogs, for me, I think pets in general, animals in general, are a tremendous source of healing because they're not judging you. They are doing nothing but unconditionally loving you, even when we treat them like crap. They still love you. And Winnie has been my greatest mirror because she is such a sensitive, empathetic creature that she picks up on my energy. And I know if she's anxious, it's because I'm anxious. And so having her be my mirror has been my greatest invitation to recognize when I am in that anxious, depressed place. And having her there to just snuggle with, to just stare at me. Sometimes she just sits there and she just stares at me all day. I'm like, what are you looking at? I can't be that interesting. And what's funny is that my mom used to just stare at me. And I have my own reasons why I think that Winnie has some of the energy of my mom. And I know that pets just like, they'll just sit and stare at us. That's what they do. But can you imagine loving something so much that you just want to look at it all day? Like finding such comfort in someone that you just want to stare at them all day? Winnie just loves me for reasons I can't explain. She just loves me and she's there for me. And she is often the reason when I was really anxious and depressed and was praying every day that I wouldn't wake up, she's what got me out of bed. She is the reason that I am still here. No offense to my friends and my family, but on the days when life got so dark that I prayed to no longer be here, the only thing that kept me here was bargaining with the divine that I just wanted to live long enough to take care of Winnie. And then when she's gone, I wanted to be gone because I didn't see any reason to go on beyond her. So if you are in that place of feeling like there's no reason for you to go on, a pet can help us find that reason. And it's Winnie that has brought me back from those depths. So the power of animals to help heal us is really profound. The 8th thing is that I stopped trying to live for my mom or to make her proud. I know that it's important to me to honor my mom's legacy and to just honor her memory. This is why I still talk about her. And there's a difference between that and feeling like I still, whether she was alive or not, I have to make her proud. I have to do something for her. It's not what it's about. Even if your parents are still alive, it's not about making them proud. It's not about living your life for them. It's about living it for you. Even though she was my biggest champion and my biggest fan, I've had to learn that I am my biggest champion. I am my biggest fan. Because to believe that that was taken away when she died forgets that I am still here, that I am inherently worthy, and that I can be my biggest champion. Again, it doesn't mean that we don't need other people. I'm not saying that at all. But what it means is that we don't have to depend on other people to champion us. My mom taught me to stick up for myself. So I'm going to stick up for myself. I am going to be my biggest champion, my biggest fan. And I think in doing that is actually how I end up really honoring my mom, is because I'm doing what she taught me to do. The 9th thing is that I want to invite you to trust that your loved one is still there. Religious, philosophical, spiritual beliefs aside, can you trust that their soul, their essence, their spirit, their energy is in you, even if you're adopted? Like that their relationship with you is still in you, still a part of you, whether that's through DNA or shared experiences or memories or emotions or connection, whatever it is, that they are still in you and you are still in them, and that you are connected through things that we cannot physically see. And this is where paying attention to signs comes in. Some people call this coincidence. I think coincidence is just, I think it's bullshit. And I think that when we chalk something up to coincidence, it just shows me that there's something in you that is afraid to believe. So, because honestly, believing takes more courage than not believing. So, when my mom died and we were still in Kearney, we were getting ready for the memorial service actually that morning. And my brother was there, and one of my good friends from high school, Sean, was there, and we were all going to the memorial service together. And we stopped at the Caribou Coffee that was right by my mom's apartment on the way to the church so I could get some coffee. And we pulled up to the window, we ordered our coffees, and we went to pay. And Sean had given me a gift card for Caribou because she knew I loved coffee. And I went to pay with the gift card. And I said, I know there's not enough on the gift card to cover the full balance, so let me know what I owe. And when the cashier came back, she said what I owed was 26 cents. And that hit me like a ton of bricks, because several years before that, there was a country song. I think it's by the Wilkinsons. I might bobble that, so I'll correct it in the show notes. But there was a song called 26 Cents that my mom absolutely loved. And she printed off the lyrics, the chorus to it, and framed it along with a quarter and a penny and gave it to me as a gift. And part of the chorus said, here's a penny for your thoughts, a quarter for the call, and all of your mama's love. And the song was about a girl leaving home and the connection between her and her mom. And so when the cashier told me that there was 26 cents left on my bill, that doesn't seem like coincidence on the morning that we're on the way to my mom's memorial service. You'll never convince me that that's a coincidence. Out of all the numbers up to 99 that could have been left for me to pay, or however many dollars that could have been left for me to pay, and it was 26 cents. That's my mom talking to me. So not believing doesn't make you stronger. It's actually a form of resistance. It can actually compound your pain and cause more suffering. So I want to invite you to believe that your loved one is talking to you. Maybe you just aren't hearing or seeing or feeling or recognizing how they're talking to you, because it's not going to be obvious. They're not going to be like, come down and stand in front of you and be like, hey, I'm here. They might be talking to you in terms of 26 cents that you still owe on a coffee bill. They might be talking to you in the birds, or through your pet, or in dreams that you have. I had a dream several months, maybe even a year after my mom died, where the dream was my brother and her fiance Kurt and me were all in some attic that wasn't her house, and we were trying to clean the attic and go through all the stuff, which had very much been part of our real world experience. And we were trying to go through all her stuff, and I was pissed. I'm like, Mom left us with all this shit to go through. How could she do that? How could she leave us? This was my angry phase. How could she leave this? How could she do this to us? And in the dream, she came to me and she stood in front of me and she said, Do you really think I wanted to leave you? And I think that's when I stopped being angry at her. So look for the signs. Not only talk to them and about them, but let them talk to you. And coincidentally, my 10th tip is allow yourself to cry. Allow yourself to cry. Allow those tears to wash over and through you. Allow them to cleanse you, to nourish you, to be a way that you honor your relationship with your parent, whatever that relationship look like. Allow yourself to cry. Cry in front of other people. Yeah, let's just give ourselves permission to cry more, okay? It's not a sign of weakness. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of vulnerability. It's a sign of willingness to tap into something that is a portal to your greater healing. We did it. Those are my 10 tips for your healing journey in navigating the loss of your parent at any age. There's a poem that I meant to have handy. I'm going to see if I can find it while I'm talking to you. So give me a second. And as I'm trying to pull this poem up, because it's a poem that my mom wrote that we found after she died, because my mom, I think before she had me, and even all throughout her life, in fact, she loved to write. She loved to write poems. She always wrote poems for her mom, her dad, her aunt. Like, she always wrote poems and read poems at people's funerals, family members when they passed away. And I didn't write a poem for her funeral. Or from her memorial service, I'd written her other poems, and so I read one of those for her service. But after she died, we found a lot of stuff that she'd written that we'd never seen. And so one of the poems that she wrote that I read at her memorial service, she didn't entitle it, so I've called it Patty's Rainbow. And I want to share Patty's Rainbow with you. Before the rainbow comes the rain, slanting silver at the pane, washing every leaf and stalk and daffodils that line the walk. Then the world is fresh once more. A rainbow will open heaven's door. And so it is with every prayer when there are burdens we must bear. Like a cloud that hides the sun from view, God will be there listening to you, and your heart will shed despair in the rainbow of a prayer. So I'm going to leave it right there with my mom's words and my tears in honor of her. And as always, I'm going to wish you all to stay gold, Gen Xers.